Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey with Taylor and Brandon on Married at First Sight. Let's watch this show and see if anything of interest comes out of my face. I'm a couples therapist. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. Let's find out.
Did you take your hand off my camera? Back up.
I tell Brandon that the difficult person that you're being on camera is not somebody I really want to be married to. He responds like, oh, you don't want to be married to me. He takes off his ring. He throws it and says, we don't have to be in this marriage, and he leaves.
When I got back to the room, he was gone.
Like I said before in a previous episode, total speculation, I have no idea, but the data we have before us is that he said that when a camera was in his face when he was waking up, Taylor was doing a selfie video, he had a panic attack. He said that, and he was shaking and trembling with terror and fear and panic and anxiety for several minutes after that. That tells us that he has a traumatic reaction to being filmed or having his boundaries violated or something. And that is a physiological reaction that's not cognitive. You don't have any choice over that. Think about it if you've never had PTSD or if you've never had a traumatic reaction. Think about it like if you had to jump out of a plane for the first time and trust that your parachute was going to open. Your body would go through a lot of physiological reactions to that, where you know, depending on who you are, you might panic and not really want to jump out of the plane, even though in your mind you're like, yeah, parachutes work all the time. Anyway, point is that it's involuntary. And then the camera crew, seemingly, in my opinion, were trying to provoke him and trying to get a story, trying to see if they could get him to react like paparazzi in a sense. And he was trying to get some space, and I'm guessing that triggered some of his trauma response, having his privacy, or not privacy, but his boundaries, maybe even his physical integrity invaded. And he probably learned at an early age, total speculation, that if he didn't put his hands on people or he didn't push people away, that they would really invade his space. And then Taylor came onto the scene and was trying to help, but historically, up until this point, she didn't really understand, I think, that he has potentially a legit trauma issue. And by her trying to help, she said some things like, I don't want to be married to someone who acts like this. And I think in that moment, total speculation, for him, he just wanted someone to be on his side. He probably felt very alone. Again, you're potentially having a traumatic reaction. I mean, so I don't know about Brandon, but I'll tell you about other people I've treated, or even myself. A lot of you have probably been through traumatic reactivity before. When you're triggered, your distress level skyrockets, your body goes into panic mode, and you just want some safety. And sometimes what we turn to for safety are our loved ones, perhaps our wife. And we want our spouse or our parents or someone to just say, everything's okay, I'm with you. I'm here to help you. What do you need? And then you're like, I just need these cameras to get away from me. Okay, let's get the cameras away from you. Let's get your distress down. Let's get you to calm down. That's usually what people are looking for. Well, Taylor came over and was just like, I don't want to be married to someone who is a jerk to the cameraman and the producers. Well, that just, flipped her to the enemy, I'm guessing. And then the distress really skyrocketed because he probably thought, Taylor's the only person who could be on my side, and she's not even on my side. So all bets are off. I'm gonna start swinging. I'm gonna start saying a bunch of nasty words. I'm gonna run off. I'm gonna get away from this. I can't stand this. This is humiliating. All of those traumas are coming back up for me. Total speculation. As the Reverend is heading into the situation, which I'm glad that he is. I wish the marriage and family therapist would come in because she should know about trauma reactivity. But once again, Taylor isn't really framing it that way. It makes sense. Not a lot of people understand trauma, and he hasn't made it easy to explain it to her. He's explained it a little bit, but not enough, apparently. And so Taylor still sees it as he's being a jerkface. And he is. But if we understand where it comes from, then it explains it. It doesn't excuse his behavior. He said some nasty words, verbal abusive words. And then there was that day when he was treating Taylor like crap all day. All that is immoral. It's immoral to do bad things to other people when you can refrain from it. But when we're triggered, we do nasty things. The thing that I always say to people, to have a simple analogy, is you're helping your 7-year-old learn how to ride a bike without training wheels. And you're going down the street and your kid is, scared and doesn't know what to do. And then you let them kind of ride off on their own, and they crash and burn, and they skin their leg across the asphalt, and they're kind of bleeding a little bit. And you come up on the scene and you're worried about your kid. You're like, oh my God, you fell. And she just starts yelling at you. She's just like, I never want to ride a bike again. Why did you make me do this? You're a terrible mother. You're a terrible father. Well, most of us parents can recognize that that's a normal reaction because they're freaking out. They just fell off of a bike and they're bleeding out of their leg. They're in a bad mood. They just had a very distressful event happen. They're emotional, and they're not going to say natural thing, or they're not going to say rational things. My cat wants to join in. My cat just loves to talk, like me. And so we would excuse the 7-year-old in that moment and say, well, we'll give it 5-10 minutes. She'll calm down, and then she'll probably be more rational and more calm down because her distress level will come down, and we'll comfort her. What we don't do as a parent and go like, stop talking to me that way. What we do is we just let it go past us. It's just let it wash off our back. Let's tend to our distressed child, and then we'll get them to a better place. Adults are the same way. Adults have the same capacity for freakouts and meltdowns and emotional dysregulation and trauma, but we expect adults somehow not to, and that's a problem. Anyway, let's see what happens.
I tried, but...
Now, you ain't trying to do I'm gonna calm down when I'm in Washington.
He told everybody on the bus to go themselves.
So what that looks like to me, it's not okay behavior that Brandon did, but what it looks like to me is a place of earlier development. That kind of speak is not really adult speak. It's 13-year-old speak or 16-year-old speak maybe, or just childish speak. And when when our traumas are triggered, we tend to regress back to an earlier age and an earlier level of maturity. So I would want to talk with Brandon. I hope that he does, and I hope we can get to what is going on for him.
And he's like, I specifically don't want to sit next to her. She can go, this, that, and the third. Like the entire bus ride to the airport. He's very childish, and he was disrespecting me.
Wow.
Right. I know what I'm going to take, and I know how I should be treated. And at this point, Pastor Cal, I'm like so over it. I've just been highly disrespected for no real reason. And that type of person who is disrespectful, that's not a person I want to be married to.
Yeah, totally get it. Yeah, and Reverend is validating her feelings, which is the right thing to do. Her feelings are totally valid. She doesn't deserve to be yelled at like that. She was mistreated half of the honeymoon. So I feel bad for her for sure.
This is crazy.
It is crazy.
This is not the person that we chose for you. I don't tolerate disrespect like that.
I'm really having a tough time wrapping my head around the things that Taylor is saying Brandon did. This is truly shocking and disappointing behavior.
How about you get the clinician in there, because they actually supposedly know how to evaluate this sort of behavior in a clinical manner. Let's get the clinician in there.
Straight up man to man about some of the events, because Brandon, they've been pretty severe, man. 5 couples are all going through the same production. Everybody is, including Taylor. Why is it affecting you this way?
This is a new level of vulnerability for me. I'm a very reserved, private person, and just the cameras, all of that in my face. I reached a breaking point and I was just tired, and all I wanted was some time to myself. And I had a meltdown because I felt like I was being played, and this goes back to
Played by who?
Everyone, all involved.
Brandon isn't helping the Reverend understand, because unless Brandon doesn't have any trauma reactivity, which has just been my hypothesis thus far, the way Brandon is describing it is, it's basically like a preference, right? He's just like, yeah, I don't prefer to have cameras in my face. And so that's why I was verbally abusive to Taylor and everyone else, and was a terrible human being to everyone, just because I don't prefer to have cameras in my face. That doesn't make much sense, right? And then he's saying he had a meltdown basically because he doesn't prefer to have cameras in his face. Now, it's quite possible for many people watching right now, that when you have been traumatized, you aren't necessarily aware that you have trauma reactivity. You might not really have a conceptualization of that, and you might be quite ashamed of it. And I suspect that Brandon is quite ashamed of it himself as well. But I hope that we can get to the bottom. And I hope that the marriage and family therapist comes in and says, you had a panic attack that first day. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
She brought up how I'm being portrayed on TV. She was just like, I don't want to be married to someone that's an asshole. It kind of bothered me a little bit. It was like, you know, when the going gets tough, are you going to just completely be done? And so at that point, I lost it, and I thought this woman was not in my corner. So if I feel like you're not Team Brandon, if you're not here for me, you gotta go.
So yeah, Brandon's not doing anyone, himself included, any favors by describing it this way. It's normal. If my hypothesis is correct, which I have no way of knowing without asking Brandon, for people when they're traumatized to try to navigate and manage their world in a way that's not too humiliating. And for men, but people in general, it's often humiliating to admit that you have traumas. That's the tragedy of trauma and of abuse, is that the victim, the survivor, often feels ashamed that they are a survivor. It doesn't make any sense from the outside. It's like if someone walks up to you on the street and punches you in the face, why should you be ashamed of someone else's crime? If someone breaks into your house and steals your Xbox, why should you be ashamed that someone else did that? Well, that's what happens to particularly kids, but also adults as well, because we stigmatize victims. That's why. We don't stigmatize people who have their Xbox stolen, but we do stigmatize victims. They're weak. Why didn't they leave? Why didn't they fight back? All these kinds of things, particularly when men are the victim. They should be stronger than that. They should move on. They shouldn't hold on to those kinds of things. And so I wonder if he's too ashamed to really lay it on the table. He's describing it, but he's not really embodying it. Like if he said something like, he could have kept this all the same. Like when Taylor wasn't on my side, it was devastating to me because I have so much trauma around abandonment and about people not being on my side, particularly when I'm in need of someone to be on my side as I try to establish safety in my world, because I have a lot of traumas about a lack of safety in my early childhood. And so when she wasn't on my side, I just felt completely alone and isolated and sad, and I completely freaked out, and it wasn't good, but I didn't know what else to do in the moment. Like that would help Reverend and the audience and Taylor to understand him. So I feel like Brandon is halfway there, because I've seen people who are less aware of what's happening. So Brandon's trying a little bit, but this half measure is probably going to get a lot of people confused.
This is marriage. Marriage is not about Team Brandon. It's not about Team Calvin.
Team Reed. Team Reed.
Yeah, but she's got to be an equal partner on the team.
You're right. I felt like my situation was threatened, and ugly Brandon came out. I mean, I care about my relationship, and I'm doing what I...
So that's interesting. I wonder if that's a phrase he's used before, ugly Brandon. Maybe that's his phrase for his trauma reaction mode, his self-protection mode. That is very important to him, that he developed early in life as a very important part of himself to protect himself from being victimized. And he felt like he was being victimized, and ugly Brandon came out. I wish he could explain why he developed ugly Brandon. That would really help everyone, including the audience, but mainly Taylor is the most important person, to understand him and have empathy, and not to excuse his behavior, but to understand it.
I can't. I've made some mistakes.
Brandon, I know, dude. And look, we all make mistakes. But your protection mode is to lash out and to cause damage before damage can come to you. Not a very effective strategy.
Okay, so the Reverend is identifying it. He seems to be on board, but he doesn't seem to be focusing, the Reverend isn't focusing on why does he need the protection mode. That's the key here. We have to get to that.
Because in causing damage, you then begin to alienate those people.
I'm not trying to justify my actions at all. I've been a stupid guy. You know, I alienated my wife. I got into an argument with her, and I feel bad. I feel bad about how I've treated her.
It's one thing to acknowledge, but then it's something else that after I acknowledge, I know how I'm going to change it. Do you have any clue?
I need to man up and take full responsibility for where we're at right now.
Okay.
So all of this, my hypothesis could be completely wrong, and he is a jerk face, and it has nothing to do with trauma. It really does look like trauma to me, but so just going on the hypothesis, total speculation that it is trauma, this is very emblematic of the way that people think about trauma without going to therapy, essentially. Not always, but usually. Is this idea of they get traumatized, they want to man up. So you hear that phrase, like, man up. This notion of I have to get over this, and I have to be strong, and I have to take responsibility, and I have to suppress my anger, and I have to manage my meltdowns. And that doesn't work, people. You cannot manage your meltdowns. I mean, you can try. There are things you can do, kind of. But the core of the issue is trauma recovery, which is a fairly easy thing to do in therapy. It doesn't always work, but I've worked with many, many people on recovering from trauma. It can take 10 sessions. It can take 300 sessions. But there's an end to that process. And it's so wonderful to have recovered from trauma. And listen to my episodes on trauma therapy. It basically involves a very complicated, very robust emotional regulation program and exposure therapy, prolonged exposure. But most people don't know about it. They don't even know that that's a thing. And so a lot of people will talk like this. It's like, okay, I've just got to man up. It's not going to work.
Okay.
I messed up.
Brandon taking responsibility for blowing up is a huge step in the right direction. But saying it to me is one thing. He needs to make amends to his wife, and she needs to accept them if they're going to move ahead and get past this.
I really want to see how we can get beyond where we are. A marriage takes a serious foundation, and that foundation has to be one of respect and value and appreciation, and that has not happened here. There have been...
So I will critique Reverend Cal's approach, and I like it, although he doesn't seem to have a radar for trauma. But I do like the way he does couples therapy. This isn't technically couples therapy, I don't think. The approach that he has, he's charismatic. He's to the point. He listens. He uses his body language to inspire. That is something that I try to do as a couples therapist a lot. You want to keep their attention. You want to emphasize certain things. A lot of therapists, when they start as novice therapists, they're kind of on their heels because they're terrified of doing therapy. For that terror can last years, by the way. I'd say on average it lasts 5 years for most therapists. I was terrified the first 5 years I was a therapist. And that terror basically turns off all of your personality, and you're just trying not to make any mistakes. And so you just don't really do much. But to be a good couples therapist, you got to be in the thick of it, man. You got to be like, reacting and using your hands and your face and your voice, and you got to listen and you got to help. It's a very active kind of therapy. Very rarely have I seen couples therapy demonstrated effectively where the person doesn't do that. Anyway, let's continue watching.
So Taylor, what is the best way for you to move forward?
At this point in the relationship, I just want to figure out first how to be cordial. I've seen the sweet, caring, nice Brandon, but if you're going to continue to treat me and the production team like this, I do not want to be in this relationship.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, it sucks to hear that from her because I feel like I'm failing to hold on to something that I really want to hold on to. Like I said, I lost it. I wasn't myself. I was out of character. I made mistakes, and I'm sorry.
So they're editing this, which I wish they would just show us the whole session, because I think this is a crucial moment in this couple's trajectory. But he is saying that he's sorry, but it's not very warm, right? I suspect what's happening, again, speculation, that for Taylor, she's feeling like this guy has treated me really badly a number of times. And so that's just got to stop. And for him, he hears that message of it's an ultimatum, which is an understandable ultimatum, which is either you stop doing that behavior or we're going to get a divorce. To him, I'm guessing, given his issues, given his traumas, he interprets that as a rejection, like a preemptive abandonment, if you will. And that probably hurts his feelings, and it's hard for him to be warm with her in this moment. That's why if I was here, I would really try to bring out the vulnerability in each of them so that, for Taylor, for example, that ultimatum comes from a very hurt place. And if he could feel that hurt place, then it might help him to understand it better, rather than just the cognitive statement of either you shape up or I'm going to ship out. If the Reverend would help her say, well, I really like you and I want to make this work, but the way you treated me, it really, really hurt my feelings and it scares me and I don't know what to do with that. So if you got to that, then maybe he would say, oh, she's not giving me an ultimatum really. She's just really scared and hurt and I feel bad for her and I like her and I don't want her to feel that way. That's the difference. Anyway, I'm not very optimistic about this session here.
You want this relationship, you have to fight like hell against those expressions of anger. You got to fight that stuff, man.
This is why you need a clinician. You can't fight anger. That doesn't work. You can't fight anger. You can't fight it in that simple manner. Like, I'm angry, I'm just going to fight it. The anger comes from somewhere. I really hope that the marriage and family therapist gets involved in this.
I can't say I'm sorry enough times. I messed up. I know I broke your trust. And again, I take full responsibility for being in this position right now, and I'm sorry.
What can you say about going forward?
I definitely see the similarities between Brandon and I. And it's crazy, the more that we did talk, I was like, oh, I know exactly why the expert smashed us.
Yeah.
Honestly, Brandon, it sucks that I feel like I've seen another side of you, but I would like to get past that because I got into this marriage so that I can prosper with my spouse, not have us both be defeated.
So I'll totally commend all three of them, but particularly Taylor for turning this around. It's very differentiated of her, very kind of her, and forgiving of her. I don't see this working without someone helping him with what I'm speculating to be a traumatic reaction.
I want you to repeat after me. I, Brandon.
I, Brandon.
Take you, Taylor.
Take you, Taylor.
To be my wife.
All right. Well, that does it for another episode of Psychology in Seattle. Subscribe, bell, comment, like, patron on Patreon, and subscribe on your podcast app. And please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.